The morning sun broke over Geneva as the alien ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. They came without warning but without hostility, their vessels gleaming like polished silver against the blue sky. Within hours, every screen on Earth showed the same image. Tall, elegant beings with crystalline skin that seemed to catch and refract light in mesmerizing patterns. They called themselves the Zintian Imperium, and they brought news that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. Admiral Chen Wei stood in the emergency session of the United Earth Council, watching the alien transmission with careful eyes. She had spent 30 years in Earth's defense forces, rising through the ranks during the quiet years when humanity expanded slowly through the solar system. Now everything had changed. The Zintians spoke of a vast galactic community, thousands of species living under the guidance of various empires and federations. They promised technology, trade, and protection. The word protection made Chen's jaw tighten slightly, though her face remained neutral. The first week passed in a blur of diplomatic meetings and cultural exchanges. The Zintians seemed genuinely curious about humanity, asking questions about Earth's history, art, and science. They marveled at human literature and music, but when discussions turned to military matters, their attitude shifted from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. War Master Kelthraz, the commander of the Zintian diplomatic fleet, requested a tour of Earth's defense installations. The council agreed, hoping to demonstrate that humanity was not defenseless. Chen personally escorted Kelthraz and his officers to the Gibraltar Defense Platform, one of humanity's most advanced orbital installations. The massive structure hung in space above Earth, bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. Chen felt a quiet pride as they walked through the command center. But that pride began to curdle as she noticed the Zintians' reactions. They whispered to each other in their musical language, and their translator devices picked up words like quaint and historical. The tour continued to the platform's main battery. Through the observation window, they could see the massive railgun assembly, a marvel of human engineering that could accelerate projectiles to tremendous speeds using electromagnetic force. Chen explained the system's capabilities, describing how it could hit targets anywhere in near-Earth space with devastating accuracy. Kelthraz listened politely, his crystalline face reflecting the lights of the gun battery in strange patterns. When Chen finished her explanation, Kelthraz smiled. It was not a cruel smile, but rather the indulgent expression one might give to a child showing off a drawing. He gestured to the railgun with one long, graceful hand and spoke in perfect English, his voice like wind chimes. Admiral Chen, your people's dedication to these kinetic weapons is admirable in its nostalgia. You still throw metal at your enemies? How wonderfully primitive. His officers made sounds that their translators rendered as polite laughter. Chen felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice level. These weapons have served humanity well for centuries. We continue to refine and improve them. Kelthraz nodded as if she had just proven his point. Of course. And I am certain they were quite fearsome against other humans with similar technology. But you must understand, Admiral, the galaxy has moved beyond such crude methods. Our plasma lances can slice through a ship's hull from 10,000 kilometers away. Our disruptor beams unmake matter at the molecular level. Kinetic weapons, railguns, missiles, artillery. These are relics of a more violent, less sophisticated age. One of the Zintian officers stepped forward, his tone friendly but patronizing. We encountered a species once that still used explosive chemical propellants in their weapons. Can you imagine? Your electromagnetically accelerated projectiles are certainly more advanced than that, but the principle remains the same. Throwing objects at each other, it is, very old-fashioned. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who had been standing quietly beside Chen, spoke up for the first time. The physicist had been invited to answer any technical questions, but until now she had simply observed. Old-fashioned does not mean ineffective. Physics does not become obsolete. Her voice was calm but carried an edge that made Chen glance at her with new respect. Kelthraz turned his attention to Dr. Okonkwo with the same indulgent expression. A fair philosophical point, Doctor. But in practical terms, energy weapons have made kinetic weapons obsolete in modern space combat. Our shields can track and destroy incoming projectiles long before they pose a threat. The future of warfare is energy, not mass. The tour continued, but the damage had been done. At each installation, whether showing them Earth's naval railgun cruisers, the Mars defense batteries, or the asteroid mining operations that doubled as weapons foundries, The Xinthians reacted with the same polite condescension. They praised human determination, while making it clear they viewed Earth's military as hopelessly outdated. On the final day of the tour, the tone shifted dramatically. The diplomatic pleasantries were set aside as Kelthraz and his delegation met with the full United Earth Council. The War Master stood before the assembly, his crystalline form seeming to glow with inner light, and presented what he called a generous offer of protection. In careful, diplomatic language, he explained that the galaxy was a dangerous place. Humanity was new, inexperienced, and poorly armed by galactic standards. The Xinthian Imperium, out of respect for Earth's potential, was willing to extend its protection over human space. The terms were presented in a thick document that legal experts would spend days analyzing, but the core message was clear. Humanity would become a protectorate of the Imperium. Earth would provide resources and labor. The Xinthians would provide protection and technology. Human military forces would be reduced to system defense only, with the Imperium handling any external threats. Human ships would require Xinthian approval to leave their own territory. Chen sat in the back of the council chamber, her hands gripped tightly together in her lap. She had seen such arrangements before in Earth's own history. Different names, different justifications, but always the same result. This was not protection being offered. This was subjugation wrapped in velvet words. The council deliberated for 3 days. The debates were heated. Some argued that humanity needed the Imperium's advanced technology and that the restrictions were temporary, until humans could stand as equals. Others insisted that accepting such terms would be surrendering the independence humanity had fought so hard to achieve. Dr. Okonkwo presented classified reports on human weapons development that made several council members reconsider their positions. On the 4th day, the council delivered their answer to War Master Kelthraz. The Secretary General stood before the Xinthian delegation and spoke clearly. The people of Earth thank the Xinthian Imperium for their generous offer. However, we must respectfully decline. Humanity wishes to join the galactic community as free and equal partners, not as wards or vassals. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Kelthraz's expression, which had maintained its friendly cast throughout the negotiations, hardened into something cold and sharp. The crystalline patterns on his face seemed to darken. When he spoke, his voice had lost all its musical quality. How unfortunate. We had hoped you would be reasonable. You do not understand the dangers that exist beyond your small system. You do not comprehend how fragile your primitive defenses truly are. He stood, his full height towering over the human diplomats. The Imperium will give you 30 days to reconsider. Think carefully about your choice. It would be tragic if humanity's pride led to its unnecessary suffering. The Xinthian delegation departed Earth that evening. Their ships rose through the atmosphere in perfect formation, a display of precise military discipline that was clearly meant to intimidate. As their fleet gathered in orbit, every sensor on Earth tracked them, watching as they moved to the edge of the solar system and settled into a waiting position. Admiral Chen stood in the command center of the Gibraltar platform, watching the distant specks of light that represented the Xinthian fleet. Around her, officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. No one spoke about what everyone knew. The Xinthians had not left. They were waiting. In 30 days they would return, and they would not be making offers anymore. Chen pulled up a secure communication channel to Mars, the Moon, and the other defense installations scattered throughout human space. She thought about Kelthraz's mocking words about humanity's primitive weapons. She thought about Dr. Okonkwo's quiet reply about physics not becoming obsolete. And she thought about something her old instructor at the Naval Academy had once said. The enemy's greatest weakness is often their certainty about your weakness. All stations, she said quietly into the comm. Begin deployment sequence. Authorization Chen Alpha 7. And someone get me Dr. Okonkwo. It is time to show our guests what old-fashioned really means. The 30 days passed in a storm of quiet activity. Across human space, from Earth's orbit to the asteroid belt and beyond, thousands of vessels moved with purpose. To a casual observer, it might have looked like panic, like humanity was scrambling to build defenses they knew would be inadequate. The Xinthians watched from their position at the edge of the solar system, and their intelligence reports confirmed what they expected to see. The humans were deploying defense platforms, lots of them, scattered throughout their territory in no particular pattern that made tactical sense. Warmaster Kelthraz reviewed these reports with satisfaction. His analysts had counted over 3,000 platforms deployed in the past month, each one a simple design that matched the primitive kinetic weapons they had seen during their tour. The humans were literally throwing everything they had into space, hoping that quantity might somehow compensate for quality. It was, Kelthraz thought, rather sad, like watching someone try to stop a flood with paper walls. What Kelthraz did not know, what his intelligence could not tell him, was that each of those platforms represented 200 years of continuous refinement. Humanity had been developing mass driver technology since the early 21st century, first for launching cargo into orbit cheaply, then for mining operations, and finally for weapons. Each generation had solved new problems: heat dissipation, power generation, targeting accuracy, projectile design. The platforms the Xinthians dismissed as simple were actually marvels of engineering, each one capable of calculations and adjustments that would have seemed like magic to the humans who first dreamed of railguns. Admiral Chen stood in her command center on the Gibraltar platform, studying the holographic display that showed the entire solar system. Each defense platform appeared as a small blue dot, and there were indeed thousands of them. But they were not randomly placed. Each one occupied a precise position, calculated by teams of mathematicians and physicists working around the clock. Every platform had clear firing lanes overlapping fields of fire, and trajectories that had been computed down to the millimeter. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo floated beside the hologram in the low gravity, using her hands to manipulate the display. She highlighted several platforms near Jupiter's orbit, and lines of fire appeared, showing the calculated paths their projectiles would take. "The math is beautiful," she said softly, almost to herself. "They think in terms of direct fire, like pointing a laser. Energy weapons travel in straight lines at the speed of light. Effective range a few thousand kilometers at most. But kinetic weapons, properly designed, these follow ballistic trajectories. We can fire at targets millions of kilometers away, and if we calculate it correctly, our rounds will arrive exactly when and where we predict." Chen nodded slowly. She had spent weeks reviewing Okonkwo's work, and while the mathematics often went over her head, she understood the principle. "How fast?" she asked. "The platforms near Jupiter are configured for long range. They will accelerate their projectiles to 0.05 c. That is 5% of light speed. Each round weighs approximately 2 tons and carries kinetic energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The platforms closer to Earth are optimized differently. Faster acceleration, shorter range, smaller projectiles. Think of it as artillery, Admiral. We have our long-range heavy guns at the outer system, and our rapid-fire batteries closer to home." Chen studied the display for a long moment. "And the Xinthians have no idea?" Okonkwo smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile. "They saw our railguns during the tour. They measured the velocities we demonstrated, probably around 0.001 c, standard for ship-to-ship combat in our Navy. Impressive by human standards, but well within what their shields are designed to handle. They do not know about the platforms. They do not know that we have had teams working for 6 months to solve the thermal problems of sustained high-velocity fire. They do not know that every platform has a prototype fusion reactor providing nearly unlimited power. They think we are desperate. They think we are afraid. They have no idea that we have been preparing for this possibility since the moment they arrived." Across the solar system, other preparations continued. Captain Marcus Hall commanded one of the platforms designated Longshot 7, positioned in a lazy orbit that would bring it near Mars in 2 weeks. His crew of 12 lived in the cramped habitat attached to the massive gun assembly, running diagnostics, checking calculations, and waiting. Hall was a veteran of the corporate wars that had raged in the asteroid belt a decade ago. Back when mining companies had settled their disputes with violence, he had fired railguns in anger before, had seen what they could do to ships and stations. But Longshot 7 was different. The gun he commanded now made those old weapons look like toys. "Status check," Hall said, floating through the cramped command module. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Park, looked up from her console. "All systems green, Captain. Reactor is operating at 98% efficiency. Projectile magazine is fully loaded. Targeting computer has updated firing solutions every hour based on latest intelligence data. We are ready." Hall looked at the calculations on Park's screen. Numbers that represented trajectories, velocities, impact times. Mathematics that would turn into violence. How many rounds can we fire before we need to cool down? 36 rapid fire, sir. After that, the barrel assembly needs 20 minutes to cool. Or we can fire sustained at a rate of 1 round per minute indefinitely. 36 rounds. Hall thought about that. 36 chances to hit a moving target millions of kilometers away. It seemed impossible. But Park showed him the projections, the computer models that tracked every Xinthian ship, predicted their movements based on observed patterns, calculated where they would be when the rounds arrived. It was not point and shoot. It was more like predicting where a planet would be in its orbit months in advance. Difficult but possible if the math was right. The days continued to count down. On Earth, people went about their lives with a tension that filled every news broadcast and public space. Some demanded that the Council accept the Xinthian offer. Others organized protests supporting Earth's independence. Religious leaders held services. Children asked their parents if there would be a war. The honest parents said they did not know. The dishonest ones promised everything would be fine. Admiral Chen slept 4 hours a night when she slept at all. She reviewed firing solutions, checked deployment statuses, ran simulations over and over. In every simulation, the battle was decided in the first exchange. If the initial salvo succeeded, if the math was correct, if the Xinthians reacted the way human psychologists predicted they would, then humanity had a chance. If any part of the plan failed, Earth's defenses would be swept aside and the Xinthian Imperium would dictate terms at gunpoint. Dr. Okonkwo spent her time double-checking every calculation. She had teams of mathematicians and physicists working in parallel, each group solving the same problems independently, then comparing results. The targeting solutions had to be perfect. At the velocities they were planning, even a tiny error would cause a miss of thousands of kilometers. She barely ate. She barely slept. She knew that everything depended on getting the physics exactly right. On day 28, the Xinthian fleet began to move. They left their holding position at the edge of the solar system and started the long journey toward Earth. They moved in formation, 12 ships in a precise geometric pattern that spoke of discipline and training. Their shields were active, their weapons charged, their sensors sweeping ahead for any threats. They expected the humans might try something desperate. They were prepared for missile swarms, for kamikaze attacks by converted civilian ships, for any of the crude tactics that primitive species typically attempted when faced with superior force. War Master Kelthraz stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Harmonious Unity, watching the tactical display. The human defense platforms were clearly visible on his sensors, scattered throughout the inner solar system. His weapons officers had already calculated optimal approach vectors that would minimize exposure to human fire. They would destroy the platforms as they advanced, systematically eliminating each one before it could pose a threat. The operation would take perhaps 6 hours. Then they would surround Earth and deliver the Imperium's final ultimatum. This time the humans would accept or face destruction. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, "we are detecting energy buildup in approximately 40% of the human platforms. It appears they are powering up their weapons." Kelthraz studied the data with interest. "Range to nearest platform?" "Approximately 200 million kilometers, sir." Kelthraz made a sound that his species used to indicate amusement. "They are going to fire at us from 200 million kilometers? With kinetic weapons? Even if they could achieve the velocity, which I doubt, we will have hours to track and destroy any incoming projectiles. Let them waste their ammunition. It will make our task easier." But something nagged at Kelthraz, something about the human admiral's eyes during that last meeting. Chen Wei had not looked afraid. She had not looked desperate. She had looked patient, like someone waiting for a piece to fall into place. Kelthraz pushed the thought aside. It was natural to be cautious, but there was no need for paranoia. The humans were outmatched in every category that mattered. On Gibraltar platform, Admiral Chen watched the Xinthian fleet's approach vector appear on her display. Dr. Okonkwo stood beside her, running final calculations. Around them, the command center was silent except for the quiet hum of equipment and the soft voices of officers coordinating with other platforms across the solar system. Chen looked at the countdown timer. 72 hours until the Xinthian fleet would reach Earth. But they would cross into the engagement range of the outer platforms in 6 hours. She took a slow breath, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Humanity's first contact with alien life. The mockery. The ultimatum. And now the test. She opened the fleet-wide channel. Every platform, every ship, every defense installation in human space received her words. All stations, this is Admiral Chen. You know what we face. You know what is at stake. The enemy believes we are primitive. They believe our weapons are obsolete. They believe we will surrender or be crushed. In 6 hours, we are going to teach them a lesson about underestimating humanity. We are going to show them what 200 years of human ingenuity can accomplish. We are going to remind them that physics does not take sides. All batteries, prepare to fire on my command. Stand by for targeting data. And remember, we do not need to destroy them all. We just need to break their certainty. Chen out. She closed the channel and looked at Okonkwo. Is the math right? The physicist met her eyes. The math is right. Then God help us all, Chen said quietly and settled in to wait. The Xinthian fleet continued its advance through the outer solar system, passing Jupiter's orbit with the confidence of predators who had never known what it meant to be prey. Warmaster Kelthras stood on his bridge, reviewing reports from his subordinate vessels. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The human platforms were indeed powering up, but that was expected. Desperate last stands often began with futile gestures. Sir, we are detecting significant electromagnetic activity from multiple human platforms, his sensor officer reported. Energy signatures consistent with magnetic acceleration systems. They are preparing to fire. Kelthras waved a dismissive hand. Let them. Track all projectiles and eliminate them with point defense. I want a full analysis of their capabilities for the after-action report. The High Command will be interested to see just how far behind galactic standards these humans truly are. In the command center of Gibraltar platform, Admiral Chen watched the final seconds count down. Around her, officers sat at their stations with hands poised over controls. Dr. Okonkwo had returned to her lab, monitoring the firing sequences from there. Everything was automated now. The platforms had their firing solutions. The projectiles were loaded. The reactors were at full power. All that remained was to give the order. Chen thought about the mockery in Kelthras's voice during that tour. She thought about the patronizing smiles of the Xinthian officers. She thought about the ultimatum delivered with such casual arrogance, and she thought about something her father had told her when she was young, words he had learned during his own military service. Pride comes before the fall, and the higher the pride, the harder the fall. The timer reached 0. All batteries, Chen said calmly into the fleet channel, fire for effect. Across the solar system, thousands of platforms fired simultaneously, the electromagnetic coils activated in precise sequence, generating magnetic fields of incredible strength. Tungsten carbide projectiles, each one machined to perfect specifications, each one shaped to minimize drag from interplanetary dust, began to accelerate. The platforms shuddered as tremendous forces were unleashed. In the vacuum of space there was no sound, no flash, nothing visible to the naked eye. But instruments recorded the event in exquisite detail. In less than 2 seconds, each platform had accelerated its projectile to 5% of light speed and released it on its calculated trajectory. The rounds streaked through space at 15,000 kilometers per second. At that velocity, the journey from the outer platform ring to the Xinthian fleet took just over 3 hours. 3 hours during which the fleet continued to advance, unaware of what was coming toward them. Captain Marcus Hall watched the firing sequence complete on Longshot 7. The platform had fired its first round perfectly, and the automated systems were already loading the second projectile. He checked the telemetry, confirming that their round was on course. 3 hours and 12 minutes until impact. He wondered what the Xinthians were thinking right now. Did they know what was coming? Did they understand? On the Harmonious Unity, Kelthras's crew detected the launches immediately. Sensors showed multiple projectiles leaving the human platforms at high velocity. The weapons officer quickly calculated trajectories and velocities, and his face showed confusion. Sir, the projectiles are traveling at approximately 0.05 c. That is much faster than we observed during our visit. Kelthras felt a flicker of unease, but he suppressed it. Confirmed? Yes, sir, multiple sensors confirm. The humans must have been holding back their full capabilities during our tour. Kelthras considered this. 0.05 c was indeed faster than expected, but not unprecedented. Time to impact? Approximately 3 hours, sir. We have ample time to track and destroy the incoming rounds with our point defense systems. Kelthraz nodded, his confidence restored. You see? They fire from extreme range, giving us hours to prepare. This is the desperation of an inferior force. Proceed with the intercept protocols. But as the minutes passed, Kelthraz began to notice something strange. His tactical officers were reporting difficulty establishing target locks on the incoming projectiles. The rounds were small, much smaller than missiles. They had no engines, no heat signatures, no active electronics. They were just chunks of dense metal moving through space. And there were so many of them. Sir, we count over 2,000 projectiles inbound. Our point defense systems are designed to handle missile swarms of a few hundred at most. Kelthraz felt the unease return, stronger now. Prioritize targets based on projected impact time. Begin defensive fire immediately. The Xinthian fleet's point defense systems came alive. Energy weapons designed to shoot down missiles and small craft began firing at the incoming projectiles. At first it seemed to work. The closest rounds were detected, tracked, and destroyed by concentrated fire. Each successful intercept was logged and celebrated. But for every projectile destroyed, 10 more continued on their paths. And the Xinthians were beginning to realize the full scope of the problem. The projectiles were not missiles. They could not be jammed or confused. They did not maneuver or evade. They simply came on in straight lines, following the laws of ballistics with perfect precision, and because they were solid metal traveling at relativistic speeds, destroying them was not as simple as with missiles. Energy weapons had to deliver enough heat to vaporize the projectile completely, because even fragments at that velocity were dangerous. The Xinthian point defense, designed for missiles that could be disabled with partial hits, struggled to put enough energy on target to completely destroy the denser, faster rounds. Sir, the tactical officer's voice had lost its earlier confidence. We cannot intercept them all. There are too many and they are too fast. I recommend we break formation and take evasive action. Kelthraz stared at the tactical display, watching the cloud of blue dots that represented incoming projectiles. His mind, trained in the doctrines of galactic warfare, struggled to adapt. This was not how space battles worked in the modern era. This was something else, something old made new again. All ships break formation. Evasive pattern delta. Maximum acceleration. The elegant geometric formation of the Xinthian fleet dissolved as each ship began taking independent evasive action. They accelerated hard, trying to be somewhere other than where the human calculations said they would be. But here was the cruel mathematics of space warfare. The projectiles had been fired based on predicted positions 3 hours in advance. If those predictions were even slightly wrong, the rounds would miss by enormous distances. But if the predictions were right, if the humans had correctly anticipated where each ship would be, then evasion came too late. The first projectile struck the destroyer Crystalline Dawn amidships. At 0.05 C, the 2-ton tungsten carbide round carried kinetic energy equivalent to 10 kilotons of TNT. The ship's shields, designed to dissipate energy weapons, provided almost no resistance to solid matter at that velocity. The round punched through the shield, through the hull, through the internal compartments, and out the other side in a fraction of a second. The kinetic energy transfer was catastrophic. The destroyer simply came apart, torn into pieces by forces that no structure could withstand. 300 Xinthian lives ended in an instant. 5 seconds later, 3 more ships were hit. Then 6 more. Then a dozen. The carefully calculated firing solutions were proving horrifyingly accurate. The humans had predicted not only where the ships would be, but had also calculated spread patterns, firing multiple rounds at slightly different angles to cover the most likely evasion vectors. The Xinthian fleet was not fighting a battle. They were running a gauntlet, trying to survive a hail of relativistic projectiles that had been fired hours before they even knew they were in danger. Kelthraz gripped his command chair as the harmonious unity shook from a near miss. A projectile had passed within 100 meters of his flagship, and even that was enough to cause damage from the shockwave and radiation. Damage report. Shields holding at 40%. Hull breaches on decks 6 and 7. Casualty reports coming in. Sir, we have lost 12 ships. 12 ships in less than 2 minutes. The number hit Kelthraz like a physical blow. 12 ships. The humans had destroyed 12 ships with weapons the Imperium had dismissed as primitive. He looked at the tactical display again, seeing it with new eyes. The human platforms were still out there, spread throughout the solar system, still firing. More rounds were inbound even now, fired from platforms at different ranges timed to arrive in waves. This was not a desperate last stand. This was a carefully orchestrated ambush. The humans had turned their entire solar system into an artillery kill zone. "Full retreat," Kelthraz ordered, his voice tight. "All ships, maximum acceleration away from the inner system. We need to get out of range of their weapons." But retreat was easier ordered than executed. The Xinthian ships accelerated hard, burning fuel at maximum rate. But they could not accelerate faster than the Yao projectiles that were already in flight. For the next 40 minutes, rounds continued to arrive, each one fired from platforms at different distances, each one timed to hit the predicted retreat vectors. The Xinthian fleet scattered, each ship taking a different heading, hoping that spreading out would make targeting harder. Some ships survived through luck or through skillful maneuvering by their captains. Others were not as fortunate. The cruiser Eternal Harmony took a direct hit that split it in two. The battlecruiser Luminous Path was struck by 3 rounds in rapid succession and disintegrated. The destroyer Swift Resolution managed to dodge 2 projectiles only to be hit by a third that had been aimed at the empty space it dodged into. By the time the surviving ships cleared the range of the outer platform ring, the Xinthian fleet had been reduced by more than half. Of the 42 ships that had entered the solar system with such confidence, only 18 remained combat capable. Another 7 were crippled, limping along with damaged engines and failing life support. The others were debris, expanding clouds of wreckage marked by the brief lives of their crews. On Gibraltar platform, Admiral Chen watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The first engagement was over. The platforms had fired according to plan, and the results exceeded even the optimistic projections. But she took no joy in the deaths. War was never something to celebrate, even when you won. She had just killed thousands of beings whose only crime was following orders and believing their leaders when they said humanity was weak. Dr. Okonkwo appeared on her screen, calling from the physics lab. "Admiral, preliminary results are even better than we hoped. Accuracy was within 2% of projections. The outer ring platforms are reloading now. They can be ready to fire again in 6 hours." Chen nodded. "The Xinthians are retreating. They will regroup and reassess. They thought this would be easy. Now they know it will not be, but they will not give up. The Imperium does not accept defeat from species they consider inferior. They will come again, and next time they will be prepared for what we can do. Then we need to be ready to show them what else we can do," Okonkwo said. Chen allowed herself a small, fierce smile. "Indeed, and I think it is time we deployed the inner system defenses. If they want Earth, they will have to run a gauntlet that makes this look like a warning shot. Get me Captain Hall and the other platform commanders. We need to discuss the next phase." Millions of kilometers away, War Master Kelthraz sat in his damaged command chair, staring at the casualty reports. 24 ships lost or crippled. Thousands of his people dead, all because he had underestimated a species that still used what he had called primitive weapons. The shame was overwhelming, but beneath the shame was something else. Fear. Real fear that humanity might actually win this fight. That thought, more than anything else, shook him to his core. But he was Xinthian. He was War Master of the Imperium, and he would not be defeated by primitives no matter how clever they were with their obsolete weapons. The fleet would rest, repair, and prepare, and then they would show the humans what true galactic military power looked like. 3 days after the first engagement, the remnants of the Xinthian fleet held position at the very edge of the solar system, far beyond the range of even humanity's longest-ranged platforms. War Master Kelthraz had used those days to reorganize his forces, treat the wounded, and most importantly, to think. The shame of his initial defeat burned in his chest, but he forced himself to analyze what had happened with cold military logic. The humans had surprised him once. He would not allow it to happen again. His tactical officers had worked around the clock, studying every piece of data from the engagement. They now understood the human strategy. The platforms were essentially massive railguns, fixed in position but capable of firing projectiles at extraordinary velocities over extreme ranges. Dangerous, yes, but also limited. Once you knew where the platforms were located, you could calculate safe approach vectors. And unlike energy weapons, kinetic projectiles took time to reach their targets, time that could be used for evasion if you were prepared. Kelthraz had also called for reinforcements. The message he sent to the Imperium was carefully worded, emphasizing the unexpected nature of the human capabilities rather than his own failure to anticipate them. Help was coming, but it would take weeks to arrive. In the meantime, he had to make a decision. Wait for reinforcements or press the attack with his remaining forces. Pride and duty demanded he continue. The Imperium did not accept defeat, especially not from newly discovered species. Warmaster, his senior tactical officer, approached. We have completed our analysis of the human platforms. We have identified 3,214 separate installations, distributed throughout the inner and outer solar system. However, our scans indicate they are fixed defenses. Once we plot their positions and firing arcs, we can chart an approach that minimizes our exposure. Kelthraz studied the tactical projection. His officer was right. The platforms were powerful, but they could not move. A fast approach using asteroids and orbital mechanics for cover could get his fleet close enough to Earth that the outer platforms could not fire without risking hitting the planet they were meant to defend. Once inside that defensive shell, his ships could destroy Earth's close-in defenses with conventional weapons. It was risky, but it was possible. Prepare the fleet for final assault, Kelthraz ordered. We will use a high-speed approach, maximum acceleration. Our goal is to break through to Earth orbit as quickly as possible. Once there, the humans will have to surrender or watch us reduce their homeworld to ash. And this time we will be ready for their artillery. On Gibraltar platform, Admiral Chen received word of the Xinthian fleet's movements. They were coming again, as she knew they would. But this time they were coming fast, using a trajectory that minimized exposure to the outer platforms. Her tactical staff had wargamed dozens of possible Xinthian responses, and this was one they had anticipated. She allowed herself a small smile. The Xinthians were learning, but so was humanity. They think we only have the platforms, Chen said to her staff. They have been focused on counting fixed defenses. They do not know about the mobile units. Captain Marcus Hall was no longer on Longshot 7. His platform had been temporarily shut down for maintenance after its intensive firing sequence. Instead, he now commanded the ESS Stennis, a dreadnought-class warship that represented the pinnacle of human naval engineering. The Stennis was not alone. Arrayed throughout the inner solar system were 24 heavy warships, each one built around a spinal mass driver that made the platform guns look modest by comparison. These were not the ships the Xinthians had seen during their tour. Those had been standard patrol cruisers, important but not exceptional. The dreadnoughts had been kept hidden, powered down and masked among the asteroid belt's industrial facilities. They were humanity's mobile artillery, capable of matching accelerations with any ship in known space while carrying the firepower to threaten capital ships. Hall stood on the bridge of the Stennis, watching his crew perform final checks on the main gun. The weapon ran the entire length of the ship, nearly 800 meters of electromagnetic coils and focusing systems. It could fire a 50-ton projectile at 0.1 C, 10% of light speed. At that velocity, the kinetic energy was incomprehensible. A single hit would not just destroy a ship, it would vaporize it. Captain Hall, Chen's face appeared on his main screen. The Xinthians are beginning their approach. They are using a fast transit, trying to minimize exposure to our outer defenses. Your task force will intercept them at the asteroid belt. Do not engage until they are committed to their approach vector. I want them deep in the kill zone before they know you are there. Hall acknowledged the order. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. Many of them were veterans like him, people who had served in the belt during the corporate wars. They understood space combat at a level that came from experience, not just training. They knew that in the vast emptiness between worlds, patience was as important as firepower. The Xinthian fleet came like a spear thrust, 18 warships in a tight formation accelerating at the maximum rate their engines could sustain. They moved fast enough that relativistic effects became noticeable, time dilation measurably different between them and the stationary human platforms. Kelthraz watched the distance counter decrease, counting down the time until they would reach Earth. His point defense systems were at maximum readiness, prepared to intercept any incoming projectiles. His shields were configured to absorb as much kinetic energy as possible, their settings adjusted based on hard lessons from the first engagement. Sir, we are approaching the asteroid belt, his navigation officer reported. Recommend reducing speed to avoid collisions with uncharted objects. Kelthraz considered it, but the tactical display showed he was still within extreme range of the outer platforms. Maintain speed. Our shields can handle any small debris. I want to minimize our exposure time. That decision would prove costly. The Xinthian sensors were focused outward, watching for platforms and projectiles. They were not paying attention to what appeared to be ordinary asteroids. So when those asteroids suddenly lit up with active sensors and began moving, it took precious seconds for the Xinthians to understand what was happening. Contact. Multiple contacts, sir. Reading 18, no. 24 vessels accelerating from the asteroid field. They were hiding among the rocks, powered down. Sir, they are moving to intercept. Kelthras felt his blood turn cold. Mobile units. The humans had mobile artillery platforms. His intelligence had assured him that humanity's navy consisted of small patrol vessels and system defense boats. Nothing that could threaten a Xinthian warship in open combat. But the vessels now accelerating toward his fleet were clearly capital ships, massive and purpose-built for exactly this kind of engagement. All ships, combat formation, prepare to engage the human vessels. The human dreadnoughts spread out into a wide formation, each ship taking a position that gave it clear firing lanes while maintaining mutual support. They did not rush forward to meet the Xinthians. Instead, they matched vectors, accelerating at an angle that would bring them alongside the Xinthian formation rather than head-on. It was the same principle used by sailing ships in Earth's ancient naval battles. Crossing the T, positioning to fire broadsides while minimizing the enemy's ability to return fire. All ships, Hall broadcast to the human fleet, pick your targets. Fire when ready. The Stennis fired first. The spinal mass driver released its projectile with a flash of exotic particles and waste heat that lit up every sensor in the area. The 50-ton tungsten carbide round, shaped like a dart and spinning for stability, accelerated down the length of the ship and launched at point 1C. It covered the distance to its target in less than 5 seconds. The Xinthian cruiser Radiant Dawn had no time to evade. Its shields flashed once, briefly, before the projectile punched through them as if they were not there. The round hit the cruiser just aft of center mass, and the result was catastrophic. At point 1C, the kinetic energy was so immense that the round did not just penetrate the ship. It created a shock wave that propagated through the entire structure, faster than the ship's material could respond. The cruiser came apart from the inside out, blown into fragments by forces that exceeded anything its designers had imagined possible. Before the debris had finished expanding, 5 more human dreadnoughts fired. 5 more Xinthian ships died, their shields and armor useless against the relativistic impacts. The Xinthian formation, so tight and disciplined moments before, shattered as captains desperately took evasive action. "Return fire," Kelthras screamed. "All ships target those dreadnoughts." The Xinthian warships opened fire with their plasma lances and disruptor beams. At closer ranges, these weapons were devastating, capable of cutting through most known materials with ease. But the human ships were still thousands of kilometers away, at ranges where energy weapons dissipated and lost effectiveness. The shots that did reach their targets splashed against human shields and armor, causing damage but not destruction, and the human ships kept firing. Unlike the platforms, which had to worry about heat buildup and power consumption, the dreadnoughts had massive reactors and sophisticated cooling systems. They could fire repeatedly, and their accuracy at close range was terrifying. The Stennis fired its second round, then its third. Each shot was carefully aimed, each one found its mark. Hall watched the tactical display with grim focus. "Target the battleship, the big one in the center. All nearby ships concentrate fire. Let us see what it takes to bring down their flagship." 4 human dreadnoughts adjusted their aim, targeting the Harmonious Unity. Kelthras's flagship was the most heavily armored and shielded vessel in the Xinthian fleet, built to withstand sustained combat. It had never faced anything like this. The first round hit the forward shield generators, overloading them and leaving a gap in the defensive screen. The second round hit 3 seconds later, punching through that gap and into the armor belt. The third round hit almost the same spot, penetrating deep into the ship's interior. The fourth round hit the weakened section and broke through entirely, its passage through the ship causing secondary explosions that tore apart internal compartments. Kelthras felt his ship dying around him. Alarms screamed. Crew members called out damage reports. The lights flickered as power systems failed. He gripped his command chair and made a decision he had never thought he would have to make. "All ships retreat. Scatter and retreat. We cannot win this fight." The remaining Xinthian ships needed no encouragement. They broke off their attack run, each vessel taking a different vector away from Earth. The human dreadnoughts did not pursue. They had achieved their objective, breaking the Xinthian assault. Instead, they maintained their positions, ready to fire again if any enemy ship attempted another approach. Captain Hall watched the Xinthians flee and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His grandfather had served on aircraft carriers back when nations fought with jets and missiles over Earth's oceans. The old man had told stories about naval warfare, about positioning and timing, about using your strengths against the enemy's weaknesses. Hall had listened to those stories and learned from them. Space was just a bigger ocean, and the principles of warfare remained the same. On Gibraltar platform, Admiral Chen tallied the results of the second engagement. The Xinthians had lost another 8 ships, including their flagship, which was now crippled and would likely not survive the journey home. Of the 42 ships that had entered the solar system, only 10 remained combat effective. It was a decisive victory by any measure, but Chen knew the war was not over. The Xinthians would send more ships, better prepared and in greater numbers. This was just the beginning. Dr. Okonkwo joined her in the observation deck, looking out at the distant stars. "We won," she said softly. "They called our weapons primitive and we won," Chen nodded. "We won this battle. But the Xinthian Imperium controls hundreds of worlds. They can replace their losses. We need to make sure this victory means something. We need to show the galaxy that humanity earned our place not through luck, but through capability. We need to show them that old ways, when perfected, can defeat new arrogance." Far away in the wreckage of his command chair, War Master Kelthraz made a different vow. He had underestimated the humans twice. There would not be a third time. He would bring such force against this primitive species that their clever weapons would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The Imperium would have its victory no matter the cost. But even as he made that vow, a small doubt crept into his mind. What else had the humans not shown him? What other surprises were waiting in the depths of this unremarkable solar system? For the first time in his long military career, Kelthraz understood what it meant to fear an enemy. The final assault came 3 months later. The Xinthian Imperium, stung by its humiliating defeats, gathered a force that was meant to overwhelm any possible defense. 200 warships drawn from a dozen different fleets converged on the Sol system. This time there would be no diplomatic niceties, no offers of protectorate status. The humans would be crushed, their defenses shattered, and Earth would serve as an example to any other species that might think to resist the Imperium's will. War Master Kelthraz was not leading this fleet. He had been recalled to the homeworld to explain his failures. In his place was Grand Admiral Vethris, a veteran of 30 campaigns and a commander who did not underestimate enemies. Vethris had studied the human tactics carefully. She understood now that the humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapons platform, using physics and mathematics to offset their technological disadvantages. It was clever. It was even impressive. But cleverness had limits, and she had brought enough force to exceed those limits. The Xinthian Armada entered the solar system in 3 waves, separated by time and space. The first wave would draw human fire, map their defensive positions, and absorb their initial salvos. The second wave would exploit gaps in the human coverage. The third wave would deliver the killing blow to Earth itself. It was a plan built on the assumption that humans, like all species, had limited resources. Eventually, they would run out of ammunition, power, or both. On Gibraltar platform, Admiral Chen watched the massive enemy fleet approach and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. 3 months of preparation had given humanity time to build more platforms, deploy more dreadnoughts, and refine their tactics. But 200 ships was an overwhelming force. Even with all of humanity's advantages, the numbers were daunting. This would be the decisive battle. If they lost, Earth would fall. If they won, the galaxy would have to recognize humanity as a power to be respected. She opened a channel to every human military installation, every ship, every platform. "This is Admiral Chen Wei commanding Earth's defense forces. You all know what we face. An armada that outnumbers us 10 to 1, led by commanders who have learned from their earlier defeats. They expect us to fight the same way we did before. They expect us to run out of ammunition and collapse under sustained assault. They have underestimated us again, but this time in a different way. They think quantity is their advantage. They do not know about the final surprise we have been saving. All stations stand ready, and remember, we are not just fighting for Earth. We are fighting for humanity's future in the stars. Chen out. The first Zynthian wave crossed into the outer solar system, and the human platforms opened fire exactly as expected. Thousands of projectiles streaked through space, and the Zynthians were ready for them this time. Their ships moved in irregular patterns, making targeting harder. Their point defense systems had been upgraded specifically to handle relativistic projectiles. They lost ships, yes, but fewer than before. The first wave pushed deeper into the system, drawing more fire, mapping the location of every human platform. Captain Marcus Hall, still commanding the Stennis, waited with his task force near Mars. They had not fired yet, conserving their position and ammunition. His orders were clear: wait until the enemy was committed, then strike at the most vulnerable point. He watched the tactical display, seeing the first Zynthian wave absorbing punishment but continuing forward. Behind them, the second wave was entering the system, and behind that the third wave, the largest of all. They are good, Hall muttered. They learned. They are not making the same mistakes. His tactical officer nodded, but Admiral Chen said, we have a surprise for them. Do you know what it is, sir? Hall smiled grimly. I know, and when they see it, they are going to wish they had stayed home. The Zynthian first wave reached the asteroid belt, the same killing ground where the human dreadnoughts had ambushed them before. Grand Admiral Vethris watched carefully, expecting the human capital ships to reveal themselves. When they did, emerging from hiding spots among the asteroids, she was ready. The first wave opened fire with everything they had, concentrating their energy weapons on the human dreadnoughts. The ranges were closer this time, close enough for Zynthian weapons to be truly effective. The human ships took damage, their shields flaring under the sustained bombardment. 2 dreadnoughts were forced to withdraw, their armor breached and systems failing. But the remaining ships continued to fire, their mass drivers hurling projectiles that turned Zynthian warships into expanding clouds of debris. It was a brutal exchange, and both sides were taking losses, but the numbers favored the Zynthians. For every one of their ships destroyed, the humans lost precious defensive assets they could not replace. Second wave, advance, Vethris ordered. Exploit the gaps in their formation. All ships target the human capital vessels. We will break their mobile forces, then crush their fixed defenses at our leisure. The second Zynthian wave accelerated forward, moving to surround and overwhelm the human dreadnoughts. It was working. The humans were being forced back, their formations breaking under the weight of numbers. Vethris allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had fought well, better than most species would have against such odds, but they were losing. In another hour, Earth would be defenseless. That was when the moon opened fire. Humanity's moon had been fortified in secret over the past 3 months. Deep beneath the lunar surface, in caverns and tunnels that had been excavated by mining equipment, humanity had built something unprecedented. The largest mass drivers ever constructed, weapons so powerful that firing them caused seismic events across the lunar surface. These were not precision weapons. They were siege guns designed for one purpose: to fire projectiles so large and so fast that nothing could survive their impact. The lunar batteries fired in sequence, their launches spaced seconds apart to avoid interfering with each other. Each projectile weighed over 500 tons. Each one was accelerated to 0.2 c, 20% of light speed. At that velocity, the kinetic energy of a single round exceeded that of the largest nuclear weapons humanity had ever built. And there were 18 of these weapons, arranged in clusters across the lunar surface. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo stood in the main lunar firing control center, watching the power reading spike as the first battery discharged. The temperature in the firing chamber reached levels that would vaporize any normal material. Only the exotic matter shielding, purchased at enormous cost from Earth's industrial capacity, kept the guns from destroying themselves with each shot. The calculations for these weapons had taken months to perfect. The engineering challenges had seemed impossible, but humanity had done it anyway, driven by the knowledge that their survival depended on it. The first projectile hit the lead ship of the Zynthian second wave. The battleship Eternal Dominion was the most powerful vessel in the Zynthian fleet after the flagship, a mobile fortress that had never been defeated in combat. It ceased to exist. The kinetic energy of the impact was so immense that it did not just destroy the ship. It created a brief artificial star, a flash of released energy that was visible from Earth's surface. The shockwave propagated outward, damaging or destroying every ship within 1,000 kilometers. 5 seconds later, the second lunar projectile struck, then the third, then the fourth. Each shot targeted not a single ship, but the densest concentration of enemy vessels. Each impact created destruction on a scale that made the earlier battles seem like skirmishes. The Xinthian second wave, which moments before had been confidently advancing to victory, found itself fighting for survival against weapons that seemed to defy reason. Grand Admiral Vethris stared at her tactical display in horror. Entire squadrons were simply gone, erased by impacts that registered on her sensors like small supernovas. Where are those shots coming from? The moon, Admiral. The human moon. Sir, they have turned it into a weapons platform. The energy readings are, sir, we have never seen anything like this. Each shot carries more destructive force than our ships can withstand. Vethris felt her certainty crumble. The humans had done it again. They had hidden their most powerful weapons until the critical moment. She had brought 200 ships, confident that numbers would overwhelm any defense. But what did numbers matter against weapons that could destroy multiple ships with each shot? Third wave, do not advance. I repeat, do not advance. All ships begin withdrawal. We need to get beyond the range of those lunar weapons. But the lunar guns had one more feature that Vethris did not know about. They could track and predict. The targeting computers, built by Dr. Okonkwo's teams, used the same principles that had made the first engagement so successful. They calculated where the retreating ships would be, not where they were now, and they fired accordingly. The Xinthian retreat turned into a rout. Ships scattered in all directions, each captain making their own decision about which direction offered the best chance of survival. The lunar batteries continued to fire, their shots spaced to account for reload times but still coming with terrible regularity. Each impact destroyed ships and shattered formations. The Xinthian third wave, which had not even entered the inner solar system, turned around and fled before engaging at all. Captain Hall watched from the Stennis as the most powerful fleet the Xinthian Imperium had ever assembled broke apart under the lunar bombardment. He thought about the War Master's words during that first tour, the casual dismissal of human weapons as primitive and obsolete. He thought about how the galaxy had looked down on humanity for clinging to kinetic weapons when everyone else had moved on to energy-based systems. And he thought about something his grandfather had once said. New is not always better. Sometimes the old way works because it is based on truths that never change. Gravity does not become obsolete. Mass does not become outdated. And when you throw something hard enough, nothing can stop it. The battle lasted another 3 hours, but the outcome was decided in those first minutes of lunar fire. By the time Grand Admiral Vethris managed to rally her surviving ships and retreat beyond the range of human weapons, she had lost over half her fleet. 130 ships destroyed or crippled. Tens of thousands of Xinthian lives ended. It was the worst military defeat the Imperium had suffered in living memory. On Earth, people watched the sky and saw brief, distant flashes that marked the end of ships and lives. When news came that the Xinthians were retreating, that Earth was safe, the celebrations began. But on Gibraltar platform, Admiral Chen did not celebrate. She had won, yes, but at a cost that weighed heavily on her conscience. She had killed so many. Necessary, perhaps, but still a burden she would carry. Dr. Okonkwo found her in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. We did it, the physicist said quietly. We showed them that physics does not take sides. That old principles properly applied can defeat any opponent. Chen nodded slowly. We did. And now the galaxy knows what happens when you underestimate humanity. But Sarah, what comes next? We have made enemies of a galactic empire. We have proven we can defend ourselves, but can we build a future from this? 3 months after the battle, a different ship entered the Sol system. This one came alone, flying flags of peace and broadcasting messages of diplomatic intent. It was not Xinthian. It was from the Galactic Council, the governing body that oversaw relations between the major powers. Admiral Chen met with their representatives personally, on neutral ground aboard a station in Earth orbit. The Council's lead diplomat was a being of soft purple light and geometric patterns, speaking through translation devices in a voice like crystal chimes. Admiral Chen Wei, humanity has earned the attention of the Council. Your defeat of the Xinthian Imperium's forces was unexpected. The Xinthians have formally requested arbitration of your conflict. Chen kept her expression neutral. And what is the Council's position? The Council recognizes that the Xinthian Imperium initiated hostilities and that humanity acted in self-defense. We are prepared to offer humanity full membership in the galactic community, with all rights and protections that entails. The Xinthians will be required to formally apologize and pay reparations for their unprovoked aggression. Chen felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Full membership, not as vassals or protectorates, but as equals. On behalf of humanity, we accept. But we have conditions. The diplomat's pattern shifted in what might have been surprise. Conditions? Yes, first, we want access to the Council's technological database. Second, we want humanity's defense methods to be studied and shared with other member species. And third, we want a formal guarantee that no species will face the same ultimatum that was delivered to Earth. The diplomat was silent for a long moment. Then the pattern shifted to something that seemed like respect. Your conditions are acceptable. The Council is particularly interested in your weapons technology. Our military analysts tell us that your approach to kinetic weapons represents a significant advancement in the field. Several member species have already expressed interest in developing similar systems. Over the following years, humanity's integration into galactic society proceeded rapidly. Human engineers and physicists found themselves in high demand, teaching other species the principles they had perfected. The term human solution entered the galactic lexicon, used to describe any approach that solved a complex problem through elegant application of fundamental principles rather than advanced technology. The Xinthian Imperium underwent its own transformation. The disastrous campaign against Earth had shaken their confidence and forced a re-evaluation of their military doctrines. Warmaster Kelthraz, surprisingly, became an advocate for reform, using his experience to teach younger officers about the dangers of arrogance and assumption. He and Admiral Chen eventually met at a council conference and shared a brief, respectful conversation between former enemies. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo won the Galactic Prize for Physics for her work on relativistic kinetic weapons. In her acceptance speech, she said something that was quoted across 1,000 worlds. The universe runs on mathematics. Mass times velocity squared does not care about your technology level. Gravity does not check your species before it pulls you down. We did not defeat the Xinthians because we were more advanced. We defeated them because we understood that the laws of physics are the same for everyone, and we were willing to take those laws to their logical extremes. Admiral Chen eventually retired from military service and became Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council. She used her position to ensure that humanity's integration into galactic society proceeded on terms of equality and mutual respect. But she never forgot the lesson of those desperate battles. That strength comes not just from technology, but from ingenuity, determination, and the willingness to see value in things others dismiss. On Earth's moon, the massive lunar batteries were left in place but never fired again in anger. They became a memorial and a museum, a reminder of the time when humanity proved that old ways, refined and perfected, could stand against any threat. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the weapons that had changed the balance of power in their civilization, and they left with a new respect for the species that still called Earth home. The inscription at the Lunar Memorial summed it up simply. They called our weapons primitive. We called them physics. Physics won.